There were many Americans who lived in poverty. 1/3 of America lived in rural communities where farmers knew many hard times. Today, only 3% of Americans are farmers. We don't have an economy like that. Americans have been spoiled. Americans are, look how weak Americans are. The slightest little thing, Americans go into a panic. We couldn't handle it. If Americans lost their homes and their jobs and their CDs and their retirement funds started going under, and if Americans lost everything they had in their stock portfolios, and if Americans lost their cars, and we had all this crisis, this would be a nation going mad. This would be a hellhole like you can't imagine. The country would go absolutely crazy. We could not handle it. We would face chaos beyond all words. The American people the American people today are not capable, psychologically, of going through the suffering that the Americans went through in the 1930s. Americans are not capable of waiting on bread lines and soup lines. And I'm talking, of course, I'm not talking about homeless Schwarzes here, who always have their hand out. I'm talking about white middle-class Americans. You're going to have them waiting on bread lines and soup lines and starving? They're not capable of that. They're not capable of that. Americans have been spoiled for decades. Most Americans are too young to remember what that type of suffering is like. They've never lived like that. They've never experienced that. They've only heard about it in passing. This would be a nation going mad. It would be the most dangerous time ever to live in this country, or to live anywhere, because the whole world would be in grave danger. That's what we're facing. That's what we're facing. If they attack us with weapons of mass destruction, they'll destroy this country. They will literally destroy our economy, and they'll destroy this country, because if America has another Great Depression like the 1930s, this time America won't pick herself up. This time you won't be able to have some president giving fireside chats and saying there's nothing to fear but fear itself. That won't work this time. Americans are not going to be in the mood to hear that. If they lose their cars and their houses and their bank accounts, they're going to go nuts. They're going to go nuts. Americans are not going to be in the mood to hear that. And if there's no one to turn to, you're going to see a very dangerous mob-style situation in this country. And Jews are going to be in grave danger in this country, because the danger of a Hitlerian-type demagogue taking over will be very high at that point. Very high, because Americans will be willing to turn to anyone in desperation. Anyone they'll grab out and turn to. And God will really destroy this country if this country goes down that road. So this is what we're facing. We're not facing just a crisis. We're facing destruction. The destruction of the whole country. Our country, because of the psychological implications of a Great Depression, is built on a very delicate stability and a very delicate basis, where we have an economy that functions. Even if there's a recession or whatever, there has to be a certain protective undergirding for the economy. Because if people don't have their homes and their cars and their little comforts and their little conveniences, this generation of Americans cannot take what the generations in the past took. They won't take it, believe me. And I don't care if people giving talk, yeah, we can do it. Baloney. Most Americans won't. The country will be devastated. And by the way, a nation that is spoiled, and a nation that is in panic, and a nation that can't get their act together is a nation that will not recover. If we have an attack with weapons of mass destruction, and we face a Great Depression, which is what would happen if the Arabs attacked us with weapons of mass destruction, if that happens, we're not going to pick ourselves up and recover or go on like Americans were able to do in the 30s. We won't be able to do it. A nation in panic cannot do so. A nation in panic, a nation without moral values, a nation without any moral underpinning, cannot just pick itself up and go on, cannot just have fathers go on the streets like my grandfather did and sell apples on the streets in the bitter cold for 5 cents an apple to survive. It won't happen. Americans are not going to go selling apples for 5 cents an apple to survive, to eat. Americans who are starving will become Americans who are dangerous. And when I say dangerous, they're not going to be dangerous toward their enemies, which they should be. They, in panic, will turn to whatever demagogue comes along that will just make matters worse. We are in a very horrible situation. We are very vulnerable. Our very survival is in grave danger. We must end our dependence on Arab oil now. We must begin a crash program for energy independence. We must cut off their ability to sell oil and make these massive amounts of money so that they can carry out these attacks with weapons of mass destruction. We must do this now. And we must stop bombing goats and tents in Afghanistan and killing a couple of Arabs here and there. And we must, or endangering our soldiers by sending them in for some joke of a ground operation in Afghanistan when that isn't even the source of the problem, because that will not stop these terrorist attacks. We must use neutron bombs, which have low radiation yield and will kill large numbers of our enemies. Neutron bombs will kill several million of them. We've got to do it, and we've got to wipe them out, and we've got to show them that if you attack us again, we're going to wipe you out completely. That, by the way, is something that will save this country.